Something's happening that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. The Taliban are coming to Europe, officially. The European Union has invited a Taliban delegation to Brussels for talks they say are necessary. Rights groups say the invitation gives legitimacy to a terror regime that abuses women and children.
The Taliban have passed 3 laws in 2026. That's the law that says women could be beaten by their husband until their bones are broken. Women are not allowed to visit their parents without their husband's consent. The separation law that just came last month, which legalizes child marriage.
This is Fereschta Abbasi, Afghanistan researcher at Human Rights Watch.
I document human rights violations in Afghanistan, and I have been particularly focusing on the Taliban abuses since August 2021.
I talked to Fereschta because I wanted to find out more about what life is like under Taliban rule, particularly for women and girls, and why rights groups are outraged over Brussels' invitation to the Taliban for talks. But first of all, why is the EU meeting with the Taliban in the first place? Actually, around 20 of the 27 EU member states pushed for this meeting. They say it's to coordinate the practical matter of deporting more Afghan citizens back to Afghanistan, and that to do that, they need closer coordination with the Taliban. They say this is not about recognizing the Taliban as Afghanistan's legitimate government. But Fereschta says it's a dangerous signal.
One of the recommendations that we have made clearly to the international community is to refrain from acts that would generate prestige for the Taliban. And I do think that inviting the Taliban delegation to the EU is generating prestige for them, while they're not, the situation in the country has not improved at all. The Taliban have proved in the past 5 years that they have no respect for human rights, and they have no intention to protect human rights in Afghanistan.
Human Rights Watch and other rights groups say Afghanistan has one of the worst human rights crises in the world, and the very worst when it comes to women's rights.
They're not allowed to go to school beyond 6th grade. They need to be accompanied by a mahram or a male guardian in some province of Afghanistan while they're outside the house. Their voices cannot be heard outside their home, so they're not allowed to sing. Publicly. They're not allowed to use public parks. They're not allowed to use gyms. So, when I speak to women in Afghanistan, they define their situation as if they are in a prison.
And she says the situation's getting worse.
So the Taliban have passed 3 laws in 2026. We had the Criminal Procedure Code that was passed in March this year. That's the law that says women could be beaten by their husband until their bones are broken, and they can only go to court actually when their bones are broken. And if they are able to prove that, their husbands will be imprisoned for 15 days only. That's the law that says that women are not allowed to visit their parents without their husband's consent. And if they do, both women and their parents will be imprisoned. We had the separation law that just came last month, which legalizes child marriage. There is no minimum age for marriage in Afghanistan anymore. The law says that children who are married to abusive husbands, they can go to court once they reach puberty. Again, there is no age for puberty. And imagine with the ban on secondary and higher education for girls, when a girl is married to an abusive husband for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, how would she know that she has the right to divorce when she reaches puberty? That's why I said that these laws are extremely concerning and abusive for all Afghans, but especially women and girls.
Several rights groups call it gender apartheid.
The International Criminal Court has also issued arrest warrant for Taliban leaders based on the crimes against humanity, gender persecution. Under international law, the crimes against humanity, gender persecution is codified. It's a crime and has consequences. We've also supported the campaign led by Afghan women who are calling for the codification of a new crime under international law, gender apartheid, as you mentioned. It's important to listen to the voice of Afghan women. If Afghan women thinks that the current international legal frameworks do not reflect the extent of repression and what they're going through, we believe that the international community should hear them and should codify a new crimes against humanity called gender apartheid.
Recently, some people in Afghanistan demonstrated against the Taliban for arresting dozens of women who allegedly violated the strict dress code. The Taliban cracked down on the protests with force. At least one person was reported killed.
Nothing has had an impact in convincing the Taliban to reverse their bans. So in the past 4.5, nearly 5 years, all what we have done, we have not been able to reverse a single ban of the Taliban. And I think that makes it very clear that the Taliban are not flexible to any change.
So should Europe just have no relations with the Taliban whatsoever? Fereschta says there can be engagement with the Taliban as long as it doesn't risk giving them prestige, and that the focus should be on telling them to comply with human rights, not on coordinating deportations to a country where she says returnees are often tortured.
I'm sure the EU has humanitarian priorities in Afghanistan, and they have to talk with the de facto authorities to be able to mitigate the humanitarian crisis in the country. But they have to be careful that human rights is at the core of it. They have to talk about the situation of women's rights. They have to talk about the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, restrictions on media. At Human Rights Watch, we have documented cases of extrajudiciary killings, arbitrary detention and torture of former security officers, human rights defenders, journalists. So these discussions need to be at the core of every meeting that the EU is having with the Taliban.
But here's where rights groups and a lot of European governments disagree. EU countries, particularly Germany, say getting Afghans back to Afghanistan is a priority, whether voluntarily or by force. Currently, there are hundreds of thousands of Afghans in the EU, mostly in Germany. At least tens of thousands of them have been legally denied the right to stay. Many people argue that if you let people stay without a legal basis, the system and public trust in the system will erode, and eventually people in Europe will become less accepting of migrants altogether. By the way, Germany has already deported hundreds of Afghans since it reached its own agreement with the Taliban in 2024. German officials say the focus so far has been on deporting Afghans convicted of particularly violent crimes.
I think framing it as sending criminals back itself is very concerning because, as we heard, some of these people are they are people with history of criminal conviction. Some of them have completed their sentences. I'm not sure if we can still call them criminals. And it will make it very difficult for these people if they return back to Afghanistan, to reintegrate to the society itself. But also it does, spark discussions within EU about all Afghans being criminals or all refugees being criminals. So I think we have to be very careful about the language that we are using, and I am very concerned about the language that the EU is using around these migration talks.
For Fereschta, the argument against the EU-Taliban meeting ultimately comes back to the message it sends to Afghan women and children.
Women in Afghanistan, at least the ones that I have spoken to, think that the situation in Afghanistan is being normalized. We have become used to hear that there is a country in the world where its women and girls do not have access to higher education. We wake up every morning hearing about this and we're okay about it. By not acting, we're actually normalizing the situation, and that's what makes them very disappointed about the international community's response to Afghanistan. I also want to remind EU countries that they have been very engaged in Afghanistan in the past 20 years, and they do have a moral responsibility to stand with the people of Afghanistan at this point.
What do you think? Does the EU need this meeting with the Taliban, or does it send the wrong signal about human rights? Let us know in the comments. I'm David Levitz. Thanks for watching.